In each one of these videos, we cover another 3D modeling tool inside of Cinema 4D so that you can master these and know the traditional hard surface modeling workflow for your projects. In today's tutorial, we are going to cover all the settings for the Extrude. The Mesh tool Extrude, to be specific, will cover how to use it with polygons, edges, and points so that you feel like you can make anything you imagine. So let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D and get started. You'll be an expert by the end of this video. So here we are. To start off with, where do you find this tool? Well, you can find it in your Mesh menu up here. You'll see our Extrude is grayed out. Now, the reason why it's grayed out is because we don't have an editable mesh within our scene. So let's go ahead and fix that. You'll also see that you can find the Extrude off to the side over here. I'm going to hold a click on this button here to the right. And these are our primitives, our primitive menu here. Let's go ahead and drop in a sphere. So here we have the sphere. And of course, my very most favorite kind of sphere is the hexahedron. If you have a favorite sphere, let me know. But I like this one because it has a lot of quads. And quads are very useful for 3D modeling. So I really like the edge flow on this sphere. So that's why I like to work with it. Now you'll notice that this sphere is not editable. And what that means is if I'm in points mode, I won't be able to select any of the points on here. Edge mode, I'm unable to select any of the points in here. Polygon mode, I'm unable to select any of the points in here. So you'll see these modes up at the top. Now these are what you are working on. Inside of your viewport, you can choose to work on points, edges, or polygons. But the reason why I can't click on that is because this is a primitive object with settings that can be adjusted. And these settings actually make this a mesh that you can adjust with values. So it's parametric. That might be a new term for you. That just means a model that can be adjusted with values. But we want to be able to adjust this by hand ourselves. So what we need to do is instead of adjusting this with values, we want to adjust this with our tools. So we need to make this editable. So you can see there's this button down here. We can click on this or use the hotkey for it, C. And we have an editable mesh, and I can click on the polygons, which is the first step to being able to extrude anything, is to be able to click on it, of course. And you can also see that all these tools aren't grayed out anymore because now we can work with them as well because they're a part of the mesh tools, many of these in here. Now I'd like to use this for a few examples. So let's actually duplicate this. I'm clicking on this model mode here, using the E hotkey to make sure that I have my move controls here. And now I can hold control, click on an arrow, and move this over to the right. Now we have a duplicate. I want another duplicate, so I'll do that again. Dragging my mouse, holding control over to the right. Clicking on that arrow. We have 3 of these in here. I'm going to click on this first sphere here, and let's first talk about polygons. So I'm going to go ahead into polygon mode, and we're going to click on some of these polygons in here. Another way where you can find this tool actually is a hotkey. So I'm excited to tell you about the hotkey here in a moment. There we go. The hotkey for extruding is MT. And I can click and drag in my viewport, and you'll see this is extruding. Now we're going to walk through these settings here and what they're doing. So first of all, your offset here, this is how far this is being extruded out. And you can extrude into in or out. So I could even choose a negative number like -5 or something like that. Click away and you'll see that adjusts. I'm going to hit undo here and extrude out again. Undo is Control Z or Command Z, depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC, by the way. You can also adjust if you would like to preserve groups and have this all extrude out as a group of polygons or individual polygons. So that's this button down here. You can see that by default we have preserve groups on. I'm going to turn that off, and now you can see that they are all extruding out individually. You can adjust your offset variation. So if you're extruding out multiple polygons at a time, you can vary the amount they are offsetting. So this is randomizing this value of the offset by a percentage so that you can adjust how much these are offsetting. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn off our offset variation, turn that back to 0, because I'd like to talk about these other settings here. Subdivision will subdivide these extrusions as such, and that may be useful in cases where maybe you're working with, let's say, 3D modeling a balloon, and you want these to bounce and move. They'll probably need more edges to be able to move smoothly. So sometimes you need more edges for the purpose of animation. It really depends on the situation. Maybe you want to continue 3D modeling off of this, and that's why you want more edges. For right now, I'm going to reduce the subdivisions, but just know that that is adding edge loops to your model. Now, let's talk a little bit more about these settings down here. I'm going to turn on preserve groups. And now you'll notice that we have this option here called maximum angle. So what is that? So you'll notice that the surface is curved, and we're creating that illusion of this being a perfect curve using polygons. And in 3D, everything is actually pretty much a polygon when it comes to working in Cinema 4D. Unless if you're working with NURBS, which is a kind of spline. But just for right now, recognize that this curve is actually made up of a bunch of straight lines. But we want it to be treated as though it were a smooth surface sometimes. Like if you're 3D modeling a character, sure, it's made up of polygons, but you don't think of someone's face as having a bunch of hard edges. You treat that surface like it is smooth. So Cinema 4D needs to know, at what point do we recognize this other straight edge on this polygon nearest to it? At what point is that recognized as a part of the surface we are extruding? And that's this maximum angle. And when we're talking about angle, I'll show you what we're talking about. So if I hit Shift-C and I open up my Doodle tool, which is another one of my favorite tools in here, my Doodle Paint, I'll draw some lines. So this polygon's going this way out. This polygon is facing this way. And these are all slightly different angles. So there's a little bit of angle variation happening between these polygons, and these are called their normal directions. So at what point of variation between them does it recognize it as one surface? That's really what this tool is determining. I'm going to delete the Doodle tool here for a moment. Click on my surface here. And maybe I'll choose another area to extrude. So the maximum angle is determining at what point this is treated as one group. So if I reduce this, you'll see they all become separate. It's no longer recognizing that as a polygon group that's a continuous surface. It's treating them all as separate. So you have that control with your maximum angle. So at what point is that recognized as a surface? It's basically your tolerance. So I'll leave that up there for right now and create caps. This is all dependent on your situation. You may want to create caps and you may not want to create caps, but it's very important to be aware of whether or not if you are. So if I turn on create caps, it'll cap the backside of the surface that is being extruded. So that is optional, and it depends on what you're modeling if you even want that to happen. So that's everything you need to know about polygons. What if we want to 3D model using edges? What if we want to extrude our edges? Well, let's talk about that a little bit on our next sphere. So I'm going to move on over here to sphere number 2. I would actually like to go into model mode, hit our selection tool here, click on this, and just move this up. The hotkey for the move controls is E, so if you aren't seeing these arrows here, you just need to hit the E hotkey. I'll go ahead and select some edges, so that means we need to be in edge mode here. I'm going to select this here, use the hotkey MT for the extrude, click and drag in the viewport, and you can see we're extruding. Now, some options unique to the extrude tool is you can adjust the rotation. You can enable quantize rotation, and what that means is that if you hold Shift, one moment here. So let me see if I can show you this here. You can see that when I clicked and dragged that, when I click and drag, initially I'm extruding. Then when I hold Shift, like if I hold Shift now and drag my mouse, you can see that we're actually rotating. So what is happening here? And not only are we rotating, but we are rotating in increments of 5 degrees, and we are snapping to that. And I can just continue 3D modeling like this and adjusting the angle here using the extrude and then the shift. So the shift is enabling our ability of quantize. So if we have this checked on, we're able to use shift to rotate this. Just by clicking and dragging in the viewport, holding shift, we can rotate by 5 degrees and snap in increments of that. If I turn this off, and by the way, you can adjust this angle as well of what you're snapping to. So we could snap to 90 degrees. Actually, I'll show that first before I turn this off and show you what happens then. So I'm going to click and drag. We are extruding. And now you can see that when I hold shift and drag, we are snapping to 90 degrees increments. Now I'm going to turn this off. Do the same thing. Click, drag, so we're extruding. And now when I hold shift, you can see we are not snapping anymore. It's nice and smooth when we adjust the rotation when holding shift. So you can use those hotkeys, shift and clicking and dragging in order to rotate this, or you can just adjust the value in here manually and type in something like that. So you have those controls for your edges. And by the way, these tools up here, these options also apply to the edges. If you are extruding multiple edges here, so maybe I'll actually hold Control and then move these up. So that's another way of extruding, is you can hold Control and use this up arrow. And then there's one other thing I want to show you, is let's say we pick two edges that are slightly different angles from each other. We extrude these. You still have this preserve groups option here. You can also subdivide them too. So you have the same controls for both the polygons and the edges in terms of these listed up here. If you choose create n-gons, this is a little bit of a different tool. It might not be obvious what's happening here, but you can see that we still are subdividing this, but we're not seeing those edges because we're actually subdividing using points instead of edges. So if I go into my point mode, you'll see that we did subdivide this, but we only subdivided the edges using points and not the edges. And that creates an n-gon, because a polygon with more than 4 points is an n-gon. So that is the definition of that. just so you're aware that that's an option. Usually, in most cases, it's good to 3D model with quads, although there are exceptions to that rule. Quads are usually the best way to go. So let's go over to our next sphere over here. I'm going to use the E hotkey in our model mode so that I can move this on up. And now that we have that moved up into place, let's talk about extruding points. So that means we need our selection tool, we need to be in point mode, and I'm going to use the right bracket to make my selection a little bit larger. I have visible only turned on right now. So if I click on these, I'm not clicking on any on the back side, just what's on the front. And now let's use MT to extrude. I'll click and I'll drag. We are extruding these points. So this is very pointy now. You'll see we have options here. We can adjust our offset. So maybe the sphere is an emoji with spiky hair, and we're gonna animate a face on it or something like that. You know, use your imagination. You can use this in all different kinds of situations. Maybe you're making a leather jacket and giving it a little bit of an edgier look by adding some points on it. You can do that using this tool. You can adjust your subdivisions just like any other time where you are extruding. And you have other options in here. You can control your bevel here, and that's basically controlling the base of your point extrusion. You really don't want these to intersect though, so just keep that in mind, because that becomes real messy. Like that's not, you can't 3D print that. Let me just say that. That's not gonna make sense to your 3D printer. So be careful with adjusting the bevel. Make sure that those aren't intersecting, because you'll really confuse things, confuse your computer. Be careful there. And I'm going to turn off this create n-gons here for a moment. So when you have create n-gons turned on when you're extruding points, that's referring to creating n-gons in here. So when I turn that on, you can see that these are n-gons. If you turn this off, you'll see all these little edges in here. So you have an option on how you want to control your topology, which means your polygons, your edge flow, all of that on your model, your surface, basically. That's a new terminology to you, of your model. And you can, of course, like any other tool in here, Cinema 4D gives you the option for bevel variation, so we can vary the size of the bevel and not have them all be uniform. So you can see now these bases are a little bit different. You can also use the other tools with here, like we could also vary the offset, same as we had done before. So it's a really fun tool. You can adjust the subdivisions here. And I really feel like this is one of those primary tools you need to know. The basics for 3D modeling anything traditionally. You really want to know how to use this tool. And now you are an expert in it. If you would love to learn more 3D modeling tools, more mesh tools, I've covered every single mesh tool inside of this playlist here. If you'd like more learning resources, if you're a 3D artist or motion designer wanting to learn more, you can check out my website, Ambient 3D Animations. I pack it full of learning resources there. See you next time.